Okay, so they're weeping for Tammuz, and he says, you see what they're doing, son of man? Yet you will still see greater abominations than these. Then he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house. Behold, at the entrance to the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, there were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east. And they were prostrating themselves eastward toward the sun. When is the sun in the east? In the morning at sunrise. What were they doing? They're worshiping the sun, Baal the sun god, at a sunrise service. Sound familiar? Sound anything like Easter Sunday? Again, we won't take time to labor that point. He said to me, do you see this, O son of man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they committed here, that they have filled the land with violence and provoked me repeatedly? For behold, they are putting the twig in their nose. Something else the pagans do, putting a twig in their nose. You see that when you see movies about so-called primitive tribes of people in the jungle. They got twigs in their nose. Therefore, I indeed will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not listen to them. Because of all these abominations being committed first and foremost by whom? The leaders of Israel. The ruling body of Israel and the priests. The ones in authority. Now, going on, chapter 9. Then he cried out in my hearing with a loud voice, saying, Draw near, O executioners of the city, each with his destroying weapon in his hand. Behold, 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with his shattering weapon in his hand. And among them was a certain man clothed in linen with a writing case at his loins. And they went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Then the glory of the Lord, of the God of Israel, went up from the cherub on which it had been to the threshold of the temple, and he called to the man clothed in linen, at whose loins was the writing case. The Lord said to him, Go through the midst of the city, even through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations which are being committed in its midst. He's marking a certain group of people from within the city. Not just a clump, but every man who is doing something is being marked. Apparently, this writing case of his loins, he's got the information in it about who these people are that need to be marked. Who are they? Who is he marking? It says, what? The malcontents. In what way are they malcontents? He's marking those who are sighing and groaning over the abominations. In other words, they're saying this is wicked, this is evil, and they're in pain and agony over the evil and the abominations that are being done by the leaders and the rest of the people of Israel. But the description, by the way, is the leaders. It's not even talking about the rest of the people, except no doubt there were many who went along with him in these evils. So he says, Mark the ones who are sighing and groaning over all the abominations that are being committed in his midst. But to the others, he said, now that's the man that's got the writing case. He's going to mark everybody. To the others, that's the executioners of the city. He said in my hearing, Go through the city after him. After he marks, he's marking everybody. Now you go after him and strike. Do not let your eye have pity, and do not spare. Remember that language from verse 18 of the previous chapter? Therefore, indeed, I will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not listen to them. So they are the executioners of the city, who are to execute and strike down everybody that is supposed to be struck down without pity or sparing any of them. Utterly slay old men, young men, maidens, little children, and women, but do not touch any man on whom is the mark. So who are they supposed to kill? Everybody except the ones that have the mark on their forehead. Who has been marked? The ones that are complaining about the evils, that are speaking up about the evil. opposing the evil. But everybody else, including old men and old women and little children, are supposed to be killed without mercy. Utterly slay old men, young men, maidens, little children, women, but do not touch any man on whom is the mark, and you shall start from my sanctuary, which is where the 70 elders were and the priests. So they started with the elders who were before the temple, and he said to them, defile the temple and fill the courts with the slain. Go out. Thus they, the executioners, went out and struck down the people of the city. And as they were striking the people, I alone was left. I fell on my face and cried out, saying, Alas, O Lord God, are you destroying the whole remnant of Israel by pouring out your wrath on Jerusalem? Now, among other things, what is, in light of our discussion tonight, what is the key point that we need to get from this? God has a real, strong, proper, quote-unquote, bad attitude about those who do evil, especially beginning with the leaders of the people. But he holds the people accountable if they're not speaking out against it, if the leaders are doing evil. So this is all in a vision. Whether this actually happened in time or not, I don't know. That's not the point. The point is, this is God telling him, teaching him a principle. And the principle is that the only ones that are spared are those who are crying out against the evil and in speaking in opposition to it. But everybody else is held accountable. Not just those doing the evil, but those who are not speaking out against it. So that brings us then to the next section. What are God's people called to do? Exodus 23, 1 and 2. Exodus 23, verses 1 and 2. You shall not bear a false report. Do not join your hand with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. Now, by the way, an example of that in the reverse, doing that, joining hands with a malicious witness, were when the religious leaders, trying to seek to condemn Jesus, kept trying to get two witnesses to give the same lie against Jesus so they could condemn him. So again, who is usually doing this? It's the authorities doing this kind of stuff. But then it says, so you people are not supposed to bear false witness. Don't join your hand with a wicked man, that would probably be a leader, to be a malicious witness. You shall not follow the masses. The old New American Standard said, don't follow a multitude in doing evil. Notice that again. You shall not follow the masses or a multitude in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after a multitude in order to pervert justice. Well, everybody's doing it. That's just the way it is. We can't fight it. Why, the majority is voted in favor of this or that. The majority of Americans are in favor of whatever. So what? We're called to not join the masses, the multitudes, in doing evil, and we're also called to speak out against the masses who are doing evil. And then, of course, that means also not following the leaders who are doing evil. Ephesians, I'm jumping to this one passage in the New Testament to share again what God says we, as righteous people, are supposed to be doing when it comes to evil. Ephesians 5, 6 through 13. Ephesians 5, 6 through 13. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them, for you were formerly darkness. We used to be of the dark and not of the light and not saved, but we formerly were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness and righteousness and truth. This is also what we're supposed to be doing, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness. Oh, I'm not doing that stuff. Those people over there are doing it, but I'm not doing it. But it goes on, it says, but instead even expose them. It's not enough to simply not do evil. We're supposed to point the finger and expose it. That's the righteous thing for a righteous man to do. For disgraceful will even speak of the things which are done by them in secret. But all things become visible when they are exposed by the light, and everything that becomes visible is light. But in the context, it's saying that we as the righteous are supposed to expose the evil and the evildoers, not just sit back and let it go on without speaking out against it. Job 17, verses 8 and 9. It says, the upright will be appalled at this. The context is, verses 6 and 7, but he has made me a byword of the people. Me, Job. God has made me a byword of the people, and I am one at whom men spit. Now, you know the story of Job and how he was brought to ruin and through much suffering and loss of everything. And so he's become a byword. What's that mean? It means Job's name was associated with suffering and disgrace. But he's become a byword of the people, and I am one at whom men spit. But what was Job, in fact? He was a righteous man. But what was everybody saying? Oh, he must be a bad guy because look at what happened to him. But the fact is, he was a righteous man. My eye has grown dim because of grief, and all my members are a shadow. Now, that's the context. It's alluding to this condition he's in, and men are opposing him because he's in this condition that's happened to him, which it was none of his doing. Now, verse 8 and 9. The upright will be appalled at this, and the innocent will stir up himself against the godless. Nevertheless, the righteous will hold to his way, and he who has clean hands will go stronger and stronger. The upright should be appalled at everybody pointing their finger at Job and how they're treating a righteous man. Psalm 119, verses 52 and 53. Psalm 119, longest chapter in the Bible. Therefore, easiest chapter to find. Psalm 119, verses 52 and 53. It says, I have remembered your ordinances from of old, O Lord, and comfort myself. Burning indignation has seized me because of the wicked who forsake your law. What is our attitude as people of God to be? Are we supposed to be just saying, well, live and let live? Or here's my favorite one these days that we hear. Well, that's your conviction, but he doesn't have that conviction. So somehow, because this guy over here who's doing something contrary to God's ways doesn't have the conviction that I have, then what does that imply, by the way? Does that imply that there are absolutes, or that it's just up to what each man believes? Truth is, what is true to you is true to you. But it's not true for everybody. So if some Christian is going against the Word of God, well, he doesn't have that conviction, so you can't impose that on him. But what does God say? Through the psalmist. It says, I have remembered your ordinances from of old, O Lord, and comfort myself with your ordinances. Burning indignation has seized me because of the wicked who forsake your law. That's what God's people are called to. That's the attitude that God's people are called to. Proverbs 24, verses 11 and 12. Deliver those who are being taken away to death, and those who are staggering to slaughter, oh, hold them back. Now, let's pause for a moment and think about that. What if you were a Christian in Germany preceding and during World War II? What would you be called to do by God? To sit back and watch the Germans slaughtering the Jews in concentration camps and anybody else they didn't agree with? or should we oppose it? The sad thing is, the most famous opponent to what the Germans, the Nazis I should say, were doing to the Jews, the most famous opponent, and who gave up his life and was executed for opposing what was going on, was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran pastor. But I have no reason to believe whatsoever that he was saved. Everything I've ever read about him, everything I know about him theologically, he wasn't a saved person. But he had a high moral standard and had righteous indignation against evils being perpetrated by, in this case, the government. And he gave his life for it. 39 years of age, he was hung naked in the courtyard of the prison. They didn't even let him wear clothes to be hung. He was stripped naked and hung. But most of the so-called Christians in Germany let it go by. And I wish I could do justice to the old quote saying, when they came and took the Jews away, I did nothing because I was not a Jew. When they came and took away this group, I did nothing because I was not one of them. And when they and then when they came and took me away, there wasn't anybody left to save me. The Christians are to oppose the taking away of the innocent. Where am I here? Proverbs 24, 11 and 12. Deliver those who are being taken away to death, and those who are staggering to slaughter will hold them back. If you say, see, we did not know this. Does he not consider it who weighs the hearts? And does he not know it who keeps your soul? And will he not render to man according to his work? You can't just shut your eyes and say, I don't know what's going on, when you really know what's going on. It's not enough to just sit back and just live in your little peaceful environment and not oppose the evil when you know what's going on. And you can't shut your eyes to it and be functioning according to God's ways. Same chapter, verses 24 and 25. Proverbs 24, 24 and 25. He who says to the wicked, you are righteous, peoples will curse him, nations will abhor him. Notice what it's saying now. It's not being cursed for saying somebody's righteous, it's for saying somebody who is wicked, you are righteous. But those who rebuke the wicked will be delight, and good blessing will come upon him. This is a description of what will be when God is ruling. If somebody were to say the wicked man is righteous, which is a wrong thing, that's some of the other things we've seen, calling good wrong, good evil, and evil good, calling black white and white black. That's what they're doing, and saying they will be cursed. The day will come when they will be cursed. But in the meantime, that's what's going on. And that's a wrong thing. It's an evil and a wicked thing. But those who rebuke the wicked will be delight. So we're called to rebuke the wicked. A good blessing will come upon them who rebuke the wicked. Now, we won't take time to read all the details of it, but turn to Daniel chapter 6. Let's look at an example of biblical examples of opposing government. Daniel chapter 6. Now, by the way, this is after Daniel has already said, well, you know, we have a problem with the eating of these. He didn't say it, but it's clear that it's unclean meat that the heathen were going to feed them with. And he said, you know, we got a situation here. Can we just eat these vegetables? And they were concerned that they wouldn't be healthy just eating vegetables. And David asked for permission to do that and got permission and did it. That's what I say. David, excuse me, misspoke. Daniel. And so there's an instance earlier in Daniel where there's, a governing authority asked him to do something, and he appealed to the governing authority. But what do you suppose would have happened if it said, no, you're going to eat this stuff? What would Daniel think would have done?
He would have eaten vegetables.
He would have just eaten vegetables or taken the consequences. He wouldn't have done the thing that was an abomination to the Lord. In that case, the authority responded to his appeal. Now, in Daniel chapter 6, to try to sum it up before we get to the latter part of it, there were all these satraps, funny word, isn't it? These people that were advisors to the king, and they were commissioners and all these different people, and they didn't like Daniel because Daniel had been raised up over all of them. They wanted to get rid of Daniel, so they came up with a scheme. They knew that Daniel always prayed to his Lord from Jerusalem, and he would face toward Jerusalem openly up on his balcony, with his windows open and all. He would pray toward Jerusalem every day. And so the satraps and commissioners came by agreement to the king, verse 6, and spoke to him as follows: King Darius lived forever. They got to pat him on the back, to say, oh, we're your buddies. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps and the officials, the governors, have consulted together with the king that the king should establish a statute. Remember before we read about woe to those who enact evil statutes? And enforce the injunction that anyone who makes a petition, that's a prayer, to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days, for the next 30 days, anybody who petitions anybody but you shall be cast into the lion's den. Well, they knew that Daniel daily did this, prayed publicly in his own home, but publicly, out where everybody could see him, to the God of Jerusalem, the God of creation. And they knew that the kind of man he was, he wouldn't not do it just because they passed a ridiculous law against it. So the king agreed to this. The king didn't realize, king liked Daniel, the king didn't realize what was up. He didn't see their deception and deceit. He just was kind of flattered by, oh yeah, great that everybody should only petition me, So he went along with it. And so then in verse 10 says, now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now his roof chamber had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before God as he had been doing previously. Now, at that point, the king, the one in authority over all of Babylon and all of the captives in Babylon, has made by his decree, now yes, encouraged by the bad guys, but nevertheless, he has decreed, he's made a statute, made a law saying you can't make a petition to any god, that would be prayer, or to anyone else but me, the king. Daniel knew that, and that's now the law. Daniel doesn't think, oh, I better obey the law, and after all, I could just actually pray to my Lord behind closed doors, nobody will know the difference, and I can still pray to the Lord, so it's no big deal. But that wasn't enough for Daniel. He did what he always did, right out there where anybody could see it. It reminds me of the little cartoon showed a little family coming into a restaurant, and they say, we'd like a table in the back. We pray. We say grace. We give thanks. They didn't want to be seen by anybody. Well, Daniel was not afraid to be seen, and he was not afraid to go against the quote-unquote law, which now made it a crime to pray to God. Now, is it in fact a crime? According to statute, it's a crime. But is it a crime? No, it is not. Is it wrong? No. But they have decreed, by decree, they've made a statute saying it's evil, it's wrong. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God, and they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man beside you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast in the lion's den? The king replied, this statement is true according to the law of Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. They went by a certain creed and law, and the law of the Medes and Persians was you make a decree, you got to stick by it. So he pointed that up. He still doesn't know what they're up to. Then they answered and spake before the king. Daniel, who was one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. Then, as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. He knew right away he was stuck with, now Daniel has to be condemned. But he likes Daniel. He loves Daniel. He doesn't want to condemn Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. But then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Recognize, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed." Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. So, and you know the rest of the story. He's cast in the lion's den. He was not harmed. Nothing happened to him. And the next day, the king goes and has him take the lid off the hole in the ground that he's in this den. And Daniel spoke to the king, saying, "O king, live forever. And my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him. And also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime." Isn't by definition what he did a crime? According to the people today who go by statutes, no matter whether they're wicked or not, it's a crime to do certain things that are not inherently a crime. They say if you drive down the road and they put up a sign and pass a statute that says this is 30 miles an hour here, and you go 35, you've just committed a crime, even if you're not hurting anybody. Well, they could make a statute against walking too fast. Because if you're walking fast, you might bump into somebody and knock them down. And by the way, if you bump into somebody and knock them down and harm them, that would be something that would be worthy of being dealt with. If you're behaving irresponsibly and knock somebody down. But just walking faster than other people shouldn't be a crime, should it? But they take things that are not a crime and make them a crime. And in our state, I don't know about other states, but in our state, did you know that nothing is a crime unless they have made it a statute? So if they hadn't statutized murder as a crime, it wouldn't be a crime. The fact that it's inherently in the nature of things, murder is a crime, it's one of the true crimes. They decree that it is not a crime unless they make it a statute. So the common law and God's natural law, it is gone in the state of Minnesota. Only that which they decree to be a crime is a crime. And that which is not a crime has now become a crime. All over the place. In all kinds of issues in our lives. But Daniel says, I committed no crime. Yes, he violated a statute, but he committed no crime. Well,
so worshiping idols is not a crime, and right, taking the Lord's name in vain, it's not a crime. By the law, by the statute.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
You're not going to be fined for taking the Lord's name in vain.
Right. It almost seems like it's... I wouldn't be surprised if they don't pass a law saying you have to cuss. They've already got that law in the movie theater. You know, make a movie. If there's not cussing, you got to put cussing in it. We went and saw Flight 93 the other day, which is an interesting account of what supposedly, anyway, happened with the flight and the crashing and everybody dying in that field in Pennsylvania. And they on the cast, at the end of the movie when they had the cast, several names said a name and then said himself. They used a lot of real people. Obviously, none of the people on the plane. But they used a lot of real people from the rest of the stuff. A lot of the air traffic control people, including the head guy, the guy in charge of the whole traffic control thing that was kind of heading up the whole effort to find out what was going on and deal with it. Carol read something from him from an interview. And he was distressed. They were talking about the fact he was the real guy who lived through it, you know, and he portrayed himself in the movie. And he was very distressed that they made him curse throughout the movie, even though he says, I don't ever curse. They added cursing to the real life, real guy, because they want cursing. Even though he didn't curse and he doesn't curse. Oh, we're getting off point here.
But he cursed.
He cursed because to play himself in the movie, that's what he was required to do, or they just get somebody else to play him. Now, what do you do at that point? I guess personally I would say I wouldn't do it. This guy, as far as I know, is not a Christian, because a lot of it.
If he had appealed about it or something, maybe they would have.
Yeah, I don't know. But he was somewhat upset about it, but he went ahead with it. He did it. What are you going to do? You just got to do it. But anyway, my point is, there's almost an unwritten law now in the movies. You got to have cussing, even when it's a real life situation and the people weren't cussing. I no doubt some of them were, but this guy wasn't. Okay. That's one example of opposing the governing authorities, and it's blessed by God. Backing up, of course, we won't take time to read it, but you know the story about Daniel's friends being thrown into the furnace. Why were they thrown into the furnace? Because they would not bow down and bend their knee to Nebuchadnezzar, before his idol, before that great golden statue of himself. And they said, we'll take the furnace. And of course they did, and they were fine. God blessed them for opposing the governing authority.
They were fired.
They were fired. That's good. And then, of course, we have the example here that we've just been jumping off of in Acts chapter 5, verse 29, and also, by the way, in chapter 4, verse 19, when Peter and John, Acts 4:19, Peter and John answered and said to them, whether it is right in the sight of God to give heed to you rather than to God, you be the judge, for we cannot stop speaking about what we've seen and heard. Now, by the way, notice the principle there. Whether it is right in the sight of God to give heed to you rather than to God, you be the judge. They're not necessarily saying, we're going to do what we're going to do because God told us to do it, and you can't do anything about it. They're not saying that. They're saying, well, we know that you're the rulers in Israel, and we know what kind of power you got, and you might choose to do something about it, but we have to do what we got to do. And then as we came to it, Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than men. But they're not saying you don't have the power or the ability to put us in prison or to kill us. So I believe that when we oppose a governing authority, we don't necessarily take up arms and lay for them and shoot and kill them when they come to the door. Now, our founding fathers defended themselves against the evils that were going on and the attacks that were made against them that led to the so-called war, Revolutionary War. It wasn't actually a revolutionary war, and they weren't rebels. They were simply standing on right principles and defending their land and defending their property and defending their rights against an evil king who they spent quite a long time communicating with, trying to find a way to still submit to the king, but maintain their rights before God. And he would have no part of it. He wanted sovereign rule over them, whether they liked it or not. That's a whole other subject. But my point is, going back to what I was saying, we're not advocating that opposing governing authorities by not obeying governing authorities includes taking up arms against them and shooting and killing them when they come to the door. But we still need to oppose the wrongs that they're doing. And if they're doing things that are wrong, to speak up and say no. And if it means that they're going to enforce a consequence upon us, then that's what must be. They are wrong. Probably, if we're right in opposing them in the first place, they're wrong for imposing some kind of consequence upon us. But they can do it. And then we would generally subject ourselves to that. Well, we simply say no. But most people won't say no. Most Christians won't say no because they want the comfort of their lives and the comfort of their circumstances not to be disrupted. Now, we're going to look at another example of a very godly man opposing governing authorities up to a point through the Apostle Paul. But we're going to wait and do that, and we're not going to do it tonight because we're not going to have time. We'll do it next time. But before we do that, I want to go back to Romans 13 and look at the details of Romans 13 again, written by the Apostle Paul, before we look at some of the things he did in challenging governing authorities. Romans 13, going back to that text now, starting in verse 1. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. Now, let me say that, before I go on, that I believe even if there is an evil authority doing evil as a governing authority, which in the end I'm going to be saying we are called upon to oppose, that doesn't mean that I don't believe what is said here. I believe what is said here is still true. And I believe that even an evil king wouldn't be in the position he is if God didn't allow it. So maybe he has a higher reason for allowing an evil authority to be where he is. Usually that would be some of what we read in the Old Testament through this whole study, is that he's putting a consequence on the people as they suffer under an evil-doing ruler. In the very fact he's doing evil as a cause of suffering to the people, but because of their problem of not following the Lord, not doing their part, whatever. So even an evil ruler that is not doing the will of God in the principle of it, in terms of being one who is exercising God's ways, if there's an evil king or an evil government that's there, yes, we have to believe that God has allowed it. But that's not what we're going for here right now. We're going for this. He says, there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and those who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. And then it says, the next verse says, for. Now, what's that tell you you're about to read? Some kind of explanation of why this is true, and in what way this is true. Is that a fair thing to say? For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you'll have praise from the same, for it, the authority, is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword. That would imply, by the way, death penalty, if the evil is great enough to warrant the death penalty. It does not bear the sword for nothing, for it, the authority, is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. That is why, verses 3 and 4, an explanation as to why it's true that the authorities are established by God, and they're there because they're from God, and if you oppose them, you're opposing God. But my question is this. These rulers are clearly there, according to this, put there by God to promote good and to prevent evil, to praise good and to punish evil, right? And in fact, to punish evil to the extent, if you don't want to have any fear of authority, just do what's right, and you'll have no fear of authority, because there's no reason to fear the authorities, because they're going to punish evil, not good. Now the question is this then. What is the standard of good and evil that is being spoken of here that the governing authorities are dealing in? What is the standard? What is evil? Is it whatever they just simply arbitrarily decree to be evil? If they think up something and say, let's pass a law and say that if people do that, that's evil, that's a crime, and we're going to punish them for it. Is that what this is talking about? If God puts them there as his ministers or servants to the people for good, it's a minister of God, and as minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Whose standard of right and wrong is that? It's God's standard of right and wrong. Now, we've already read in the Old Testament what God thinks about those who call evil good and good evil. So what if these people who are in a position of being governing authorities are actually calling evil things good and praising as righteous those who do evil, and punishing those as doing evil who are actually doing good? Does this submission to authority now apply if that's what's going on? Verses 3 and 4 define what he means by submitting to governing authorities. You're submitting to governing authorities, you submit to those who are doing the work of God in praising good and punishing evil. A little additional verse to go with this, hold your place here and turn to 1 Peter 2, 13 and 14. 1 Peter 2, 13 and 14, another text about submitting to authorities. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as one in authority or to governors as sent by him. Notice this now. For the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. A king who is doing that is doing the work of God. But what if a king or a ruler sends somebody, his agents, to punish you for doing good? What about those who punish abortion protesters and put them in jail or fine them or abuse them in some way, beat them up? That's happened. The police have taken billy clubs to people protesting abortion sometimes. Is that right or wrong? It's clearly wrong. And it's calling good evil. And of course they call the evil, the abortion, good. They say, oh, these people are protecting the rights of women who have a right to control their bodies. Well, they did have a right to control their bodies. They shouldn't have been doing what they did to get pregnant in the first place if they shouldn't have been getting pregnant. Or if they didn't want to be pregnant. That's when the person has a right to control their body before. But once they have a child in their womb, they don't have the right to murder that child. Nowhere, anywhere in Scripture is there a right for a mother to take the life of her child. In her body or outside of her body. Now, back to this Romans 13 again now. He defines those who are established by God as authorities as those who are carrying out the work of God as ministers of God for good and for the punishing of evil. So that's a whole different matter than when you have a government. And by the way, our constitutionally ordained government, they would basically be doing that if that's what they were doing, if they were functioning according to the Constitution. The Constitution says all kinds of things they can't do, such as the First Amendment, which was put in because the founders were afraid that people were going to take liberties. They said that we had the freedom of press and the freedom of religion, and the government is not allowed to make any law with respect to religion. Can't restrict a person's religious liberties. So what have they done now? They've said you can't put up symbols of your religion. You can't have the Ten Commandments anywhere around. You can't have prayer in schools. You can't have Bibles in schools. You can't do any of this stuff. They're making laws against what is good.
Means no religious liberties.
What?
What they've done is they've taken away all.
They've taken away all religious liberty. Well, they haven't taken away all. The Muslims get all kinds of religious liberties.
I tried to be fair. But
I know. Anyway, I'm out of time now. I've got to stop there. I've got to pick this up again next week in Romans 13. But keep in mind, ponder this, meditate on this during the week. Is God saying in this text that we should obey any old governing authority even if they're doing evil and calling us to evil instead of good and punishing good instead of evil? We're out of time. Let's close in a word of prayer. Father, we do thank and praise you for what you're showing us. Pray that you open our hearts and minds to really see and understand these principles and to bring all Scripture to bear on the subject and to understand that we should oppose evil in government and speak out against it.